The heavy oak door was only slightly ajar, just enough for the scent of rich Cuban cigars and aged brandy to slip into the shadowed hallway, and just enough for Lady Beatrice to hear the voice of the man she had married a mere month ago. "Beatrice?" Henry's laugh was a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet library. "Good God, Richard, don't be sentimental. She has the grace of a provincial milkmaid and the pedigree of a coal miner. She's just a dowry to me. £200,000 to fix the crumbling roof of this damned estate. Nothing more." In that single, agonizing breath, a devoted, hopelessly in love wife died, and a formidable, cold-blooded adversary was born. Beatrice Harrington had never been under any illusion about why the aristocracy tolerated her. She was the only daughter of Thomas Harrington, a man who had built a colossal fortune in railways and steel. To the lords and ladies of late 19th century London, she was new money, a polite term for someone they viewed as terribly vulgar but undeniably necessary. For all her father's wealth, he desired the one thing his millions could not manufacture: a title. And so, Beatrice was placed on the marriage mart, wrapped in Paris silks and adorned with diamonds heavy enough to bruise her collarbones, waiting for a peer of the realm to swallow his pride and claim her fortune. Enter Henry Alistair Cavendish, the 9th Duke of Wycliffe. Henry was a man who looked exactly as a duke should. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with striking, aristocratic features and eyes the color of a winter sea. He carried the weight of a centuries-old lineage with effortless grace. However, beneath the velvet tailcoats and the ancestral signet rings lay a disastrous truth. The Wycliffe estate was drowning in debt. Generations of gambling, mismanagement, and sheer arrogance had bled the family coffers dry. The ancestral seat, Blackwood Manor, was literally falling apart, its grand stone facades crumbling, its servants unpaid for months. When Henry approached Thomas Harrington for Beatrice's hand, it was not a courtship, it was a corporate merger. Thomas agreed to pay off the Duke's most pressing debts immediately and settle a staggering dowry of £200,000 upon the marriage, with further investments promised to restore Blackwood Manor to its former glory. Beatrice, despite her sharp mind and practical upbringing, had fallen foolishly, disastrously in love. She had spent her entire life surrounded by the grime of industry and the pragmatic harshness of her father's business dealings. Henry represented a world of poetry, history, and romance. During their brief, heavily chaperoned engagement, he had been perfectly polite. He had brought her white roses, kissed her gloved knuckles, and spoken of the long walks they would take on the moors of his country estate. Beatrice, blinded by the sheer romanticism of marrying a handsome duke, mistook his flawless, practiced manners for genuine affection. The wedding at St. George's, Hanover Square, was the event of the season. The aristocracy filled the left pews, whispering behind their fans about the merchant's daughter, while the titans of industry sat on the right, calculating the cost of the floral arrangements. Beatrice walked down the aisle, feeling as though she had stepped into a fairy tale. When Henry placed the heavy, ancient Wycliffe sapphire on her finger, she vowed silently to be the best duchess the family had ever seen, to support him and to win his heart. The first crack in her illusion appeared on their wedding night. They had traveled to a secluded villa in the Italian lakes for their honeymoon. After a tense, silent dinner, Henry had escorted her to her bedchamber. He fulfilled his marital duties with a chilling, mechanical efficiency, showing neither passion nor tenderness. When it was over, he did not hold her. He simply rose, donned his dressing gown, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. "I prefer to sleep in my own quarters, Beatrice," he had said, his voice flat. "I find I sleep better alone. Good night." For the next 4 weeks, they lived as polite strangers, sharing an exceptionally beautiful house. Henry was never cruel, but he was undeniably absent. He spent his days riding, reading, or corresponding with his estate managers, while Beatrice was left entirely to her own devices. She tried everything to bridge the chasm between them. She wore the gowns he seemed to prefer. She learned to play the composers he favored on the piano, and she studied the Wycliffe family history so she could speak intelligently of his ancestors. Henry would merely offer a tight smile, a nod of acknowledgement, and retreat back behind his wall of aristocratic indifference. "Give him time, my lady." Her lady's maid, a sensible woman named Blaise, had whispered one evening as Beatrice stared miserably at her reflection in the vanity mirror. "These high-born men, they are raised to hide their feelings. He will warm to you." How could he not? Beatrice had clung to that hope. She convinced herself that beneath Henry's icy exterior was a man burdened by the responsibilities of his title, a man who just needed to be shown that he was loved for himself, not his dukedom. She told herself that once they returned to England, once they settled into Blackwood Manor, things would change. They would build a life together. She was right about one thing. Things were about to change, but not in the way she had ever imagined. 6 weeks after their wedding, the Duke and Duchess of Wickliffe returned to England to take up residence at Blackwood Manor. To celebrate their return and the beginning of the hunting season, Henry invited a small group of his closest confidants for a weekend party. The estate was bustling with activity. Beatrice threw herself into the role of hostess, consulting with the formidable housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, finalizing menus, and ensuring the guest wings were flawlessly prepared. For the first time since their marriage, Beatrice felt a spark of true belonging. During the welcoming dinner, Henry had actually caught her eye across the long, candlelit table and offered her a genuine, unforced smile. It was a small thing, a fleeting curve of his lips, but to Beatrice's starved heart, it was a banquet. Among the guests were Lord Richard Sterling and Simon Fitzroy, two men who had been Henry's shadows since their days at Oxford. They were men of immense privilege and little substance, prone to loud laughter, expensive tailoring, and a deep-seated snobbery that they barely bothered to conceal around Beatrice. On the second night of the gathering, after a long day of shooting on the moors, the ladies retired to the drawing room while the men remained in the dining room for port and cigars. Eventually, the men migrated to the Grand Library, a cavernous room lined with centuries of Wickliffe history. Beatrice, feeling unusually bold from the single glass of champagne she had consumed and bolstered by Henry's earlier smile, decided she would not wait meekly in her chambers for him. She had found a beautifully bound first edition of Lord Byron's poems in the drawing room, a poet she knew Henry admired, and decided to bring it to him as a peace offering, a small token to show she paid attention to his interests. She walked quietly down the dimly lit, vaulted corridors of Blackwood Manor, her soft velvet slippers making no sound on the thick Persian carpets. As she approached the library, she noticed the heavy double doors were not fully shut. A sliver of warm golden light spilled out onto the floorboards. She raised her hand to push the door open, the leather-bound book clutched tightly to her chest. But before her fingers could touch the wood, Lord Richard Sterling's voice drifted out. "I must say, Henry, the old girl is looking remarkably well," Richard drawled, the clinking of a crystal decanter against a glass accompanying his words. "Blackwood, I mean, not the bride. Though, I suppose the bride is tolerable enough, if you can look past the soot on her father's hands." Beatrice froze. Her hand hovered in mid-air. She knew she should turn away. She knew the ancient adage that eavesdroppers rarely hear anything good about themselves. But her feet felt as though they had been cast in the very steel her father manufactured. Simon Fitzroy chuckled, a low, cruel sound. "Oh, come now, Richard. Lady Beatrice is perfectly fine. She's trying so very hard. Did you see her at dinner? Practically vibrating with the effort to use the correct fork. It's almost endearing, like watching a trained spaniel." A hot flush of intense humiliation crept up Beatrice's neck. Her eyes stung, but she held her breath, waiting, praying for her husband to speak, praying for Henry to defend her, to tell his friends to hold their tongues, to show even a fraction of the loyalty she had sworn to him. There was a long pause. Beatrice heard the distinct sound of a match striking, followed by the soft exhalation of smoke. "Leave it be, both of you," Henry finally said. His voice was calm, utterly devoid of anger or defensiveness. "We only tease because we pity you, old man," Richard pressed, his tone dripping with mock sympathy, shackled to the daughter of a glorified mechanic. "Tell me, does she insist on discussing train schedules in the bedchamber? How are you surviving the utter lack of refinement? You, who swore you would only marry for bloodlines." "I am surviving because I am pragmatic," Henry replied, his tone chillingly casual. "Bloodlines do not repair a leaking roof, Richard, nor do they pay the creditors who were threatening to seize my horses. Still," Simon added, "it must be a bitter pill to swallow, giving her your name. She looks at you as if you are the son, you know. It's pathetic. Does she truly believe you care for her?" Then came the words that would alter the course of Beatrice's life forever. "Beatrice." Henry's laugh was a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet library. It was a laugh utterly devoid of warmth, a sound of pure mockery. "Good God, Richard, don't be sentimental. She has the grace of a provincial milkmaid and the pedigree of a coal miner. She's just a dowry to me. £200,000 to fix the crumbling roof of this damned estate. Nothing more. Once she gives me an heir, I plan to leave her here in the country while I return to London. She can play lady of the manor to the sheep for all I care. The money is secured, and that was the only point of this entire charade. The silence that followed was broken only by the laughter of his friends, raising their glasses to his ruthless practicality. Outside the door, Beatrice did not gasp. She did not cry out. The physical pain in her chest was so acute, she thought her ribs might actually splinter. The beautiful, romantic illusion she had built around Henry Cavendish shattered into a million jagged pieces, piercing her straight through the heart. She looked down at the book of poetry in her hands. It suddenly felt heavy, ridiculous, and pathetic. A trained spaniel, a provincial milkmaid, just a dowry. The tears that finally fell were silent, hot tracks down her pale cheeks. She took a step back, the velvet of her skirts brushing softly against the wall. Then another step. She turned and walked away from the golden light of the library, back into the shadows of the corridor. By the time Beatrice reached her solitary bedchamber, the tears had stopped. She sat on the edge of her massive, empty bed, staring unseeingly at the dying embers in the fireplace. Her father had taught her many things, but above all, Thomas Harrington had taught her the value of leverage. He had taught her never to make a bad investment twice, and never to let an adversary know they had wounded you until you were ready to strike back. Henry Cavendish thought he had purchased a foolish, starry-eyed girl who would quietly fade into the background while he spent her family's fortune. He thought the transaction was complete. Beatrice stood up, her jaw set, her eyes hardening into chips of dark flint. He wanted a merchant's daughter? He was going to get one. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of the breakfast room, illuminating a spread of silver cloches, fine china, and steaming pots of Darjeeling tea. Henry, Lord Richard, and Simon were already seated, nursing weak headaches and strong coffees. When the door opened, the three men looked up, expecting the usual entrance of the Duchess. Normally, Beatrice would arrive with a tentative smile, clad in something excessively frilly, eager to pour her husband's tea and ask him about his plans for the day. The woman who walked into the room was entirely different. Beatrice wore a tailored dark navy morning dress, stripped of all lace and unnecessary ribbons. Her hair, usually styled in soft, romantic curls, was pulled back into a severe, immaculate chignon. But it was not just her attire, it was the way she carried herself. Her shoulders were set, her spine rigid, and her expression was a mask of cool, unreadable porcelain. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said. Her voice, usually soft and eager to please, was crisp and authoritative. Richard and Simon exchanged a brief, confused glance before standing to bow. Henry simply raised an eyebrow. "Good morning, Beatrice. You are down early." "There is much to do," she replied calmly, not looking at him as she took her seat at the opposite end of the long table. She did not offer to pour his tea. She did not ask how he had slept. She signaled to a footman with a slight nod. "Coffee. Fluffy." "Black." Henry frowned. "I thought you preferred tea." "My tastes have changed," Beatrice said flatly, unfolding her napkin. She looked down the table, her gaze sweeping over Richard and Simon with a cool detachment that made both men instinctively shift in their seats. "I trust the guest accommodations are satisfactory, Lord Richard. I know you have a sensitive back. I had the staff add an extra mattress to your bed, a firm one, for your posture." Richard choked slightly on his eggs. Yes. Quite satisfactory, Your Grace. Thank you." Beatrice offered a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Excellent." She ate her breakfast in silence, ignoring the men completely. The atmosphere in the room, usually filled with the men's boisterous talk and Beatrice's polite attempts to join in, grew increasingly strained and suffocating. Henry watched his wife over the rim of his teacup, his brow furrowing deeper. He had expected the docile, slightly annoying devotion she had shown since their wedding day. This icy, self-possessed woman was a stranger. As soon as she finished her coffee, Beatrice stood. "If you will excuse me, I have a meeting with Mr. Sterling, the estate manager." Henry dropped his fork, the silver clattering loudly against the china. "A meeting? Whatever for?" "You do not need to trouble yourself with estate matters, Beatrice. That is my domain." Beatrice paused at the door, turning back to look at him. Her eyes, usually so warm when they rested on him, were as flat and cold as the coins he had married her for. "On the contrary," "Your Grace," she said, her tone polite but laced with steel. "As the Wycliffe estate is currently operating solely on the capital provided by my father, I believe it is precisely my domain. I intend to see exactly what my dowry is paying for." Before Henry could formulate a response to her unprecedented defiance, Beatrice stepped out of the room, shutting the door firmly behind her. Inside the estate office, a dusty, cramped room filled with overflowing ledgers and rolled-up architectural plans, Mr. Sterling, a nervous, overworked man in his 50s, stood up so fast he knocked over his inkwell. "Your Grace, I was not expecting you," he stammered, frantically dabbing at the spilled ink with a blotter. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Beatrice said, pulling out a chair opposite his desk and sitting with precise composure. "We are going to review the books. All of them." "The books?" Sterling swallowed hard. "But His Grace, the Duke, His Grace is currently entertaining his friends," Beatrice interrupted smoothly. "And given that the debts being paid originate from my family's accounts, I require a full accounting. Show me the current liabilities, the outstanding creditors, and the proposed budget for the roof repairs." For the next 3 hours, Beatrice Harrington proved exactly whose daughter she was. She dissected the ledgers with the ruthlessness of a seasoned auditor. She discovered that while a portion of her dowry had been used to pay off immediate debts, mostly gambling markers and tailoring bills, Henry had kept hidden the vast majority of the promised. £200,000 was still sitting in a joint trust, a trust that, according to the marriage contract her father's formidable lawyers had drafted, required both the Duke's and the Duchess's signatures for any withdrawal exceeding £1,000. "Mr. Sterling," Beatrice said, her finger tracing a particularly exorbitant bill for a custom-made hunting carriage. "Why has this bill from the London Wainwright been approved?" His Grace insisted. "My lady. He said it was essential for the season." "Cancel the order," Beatrice commanded, without missing a beat. Sterling gasped. "Cancel it. But Your Grace, the Duke will be furious." "The Duke cannot afford it," Beatrice stated simply, closing the heavy leather ledger with a resounding thud. "Until the roof of this house is repaired and the tenant farms are provided with the new seed drills they requested 3 years ago, there will be no new carriages, no imported cigars, and no extravagant house parties." She stood up, her presence suddenly commanding the small room. "You will draft a letter to the bank holding the trust. From this moment on, no funds are to be released without my direct, written authorization. If my husband wishes to spend Harrington money, he will have to submit a request to me." "My lady," Sterling whispered, looking entirely terrified. "He is the Duke, and I am the bank, Mr. Sterling," Beatrice replied softly, her voice carrying a lethal edge. "I suggest you remember which one of us is actually paying your wages." Later that afternoon, the storm broke. Beatrice was in her private sitting room, calmly embroidering a handkerchief, when the door flew open. Henry stormed in, his handsome face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and profound anger. He held a crumpled piece of parchment in his fist. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He threw the parchment onto her embroidery hoop. It was a note from Mr. Sterling, outlining the new financial protocols. Beatrice did not flinch. She set her needle down delicately, picked up the note, smoothed it out, and then looked up at her husband. "It means exactly what it says, Henry," she replied evenly. "I am instituting fiscal responsibility." "You countermanded my orders," he shouted, stepping closer, towering over her. "You cancelled my carriage. You froze the trust. Have you lost your mind, Beatrice? You are my wife. You do not issue orders in my house." "It is your house, Henry, but it is my money," Beatrice said, remaining perfectly seated, her posture impeccable. "And since I am, as you so eloquently put it, just a dowry, I have decided to take a much closer interest in how my investment is being managed." Henry froze. The anger in his eyes was suddenly eclipsed by a flash of shock. He stared at her, his mind racing. Just a dowry, the exact phrase he had used the night before in the library. He opened his mouth, but for the first time in his privileged life, the Duke of Wycliffe was entirely at a loss for words. Beatrice stood up, smoothing the front of her dark skirt. She looked at him not with the adoring eyes of a lovesick bride, but with the calculating, ruthless gaze of a Harrington. "If I am to be nothing more than a financial transaction to you, Henry," she whispered, stepping closer until she was inches from his chest, "then you are about to learn that I am a very, very strict creditor." The transformation of Blackwood Manor was neither quiet nor polite. Over the next fortnight, Beatrice wielded her newfound authority with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a seasoned general. The sprawling, decaying estate, which had for decades operated on a foundation of aristocratic entitlement and blind credit, was suddenly thrust into the unforgiving light of Harrington pragmatism. Her first act was to summon the head butler, Mr. Carson, and Mrs. Higgins to the drawing-room. She sat behind a mahogany writing desk, a stack of account books neatly aligned before her. "The extravagance ends today," Beatrice announced, her voice calm but leaving no room for negotiation. "The French wine cellar is locked. We will serve the local vintages. The hunting dogs will be fed standard meat, not prime cuts from the butcher. And as for the guest wing, fire usage will be restricted to the evenings." "But, Your Grace," Carson protested, his face draining of colour. "Lord Richard and Mr. Fitzroy are accustomed to a roaring fire in the mornings, and the Duke's cigars. Lord Richard and Mr. Fitzroy are guests who overstay their welcome and contribute nothing to the upkeep of this house." Beatrice cut in smoothly. "If they find the air too brisk, I suggest they return to their own estates. As for my husband's cigars, he may purchase them from his personal, unsubsidized allowance. The dowry funds are for the estate's survival, not for imported Cuban tobacco." The true test of her iron will came during dinner that evening. Henry, Richard, and Simon took their seats in the grand dining hall, expecting the usual multi-course feast of roasted pheasant, imported truffles, and vintage claret. The footmen served a perfectly adequate, but remarkably simple, roast mutton with root vegetables, accompanied by a rather sharp, inexpensive table wine. Richard took a sip of his wine and nearly choked, coughing violently into his linen napkin. "Good God, Henry, what is this? Has your cellar been flooded with vinegar?" Henry's jaw tightened. He glared down the length of the table at Beatrice, who was calmly cutting her meat, her face a mask of serene indifference. "Beatrice, explain this." "It is a budget, Henry," she replied, not looking up from her plate. "I spent the afternoon reviewing the accounts at Coutts & Co. My father deposited the funds as agreed, but I was appalled to see the sheer volume of frivolous drafts you have drawn against it. Therefore, until the roof over the west wing is secured and the stable hands are paid their back wages, we are economizing." Simon Fitzroy set his fork down, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Economizing? But surely, Lady Beatrice, the Wycliffe estate." "The Wycliffe estate is bankrupt, Mr. Fitzroy," Beatrice said, her voice ringing out in the cavernous room, shattering generations of polite, unspoken secrets. "It has been bankrupt for 20 years. My father's money is the only thing keeping the roof from collapsing onto your heads, and I will not allow that money to be squandered on vanity." The silence in the room was absolute. Henry's knuckles turned white as he gripped his silverware. For an aristocrat, public acknowledgement of poverty was the ultimate humiliation. To have his wife, the woman he had mocked as a mere transaction, expose him in front of his peers was a wound to his pride that cut deeper than any blade. The next morning, Richard and Simon suddenly remembered pressing engagements in London and departed on the first train, unable to endure the austerity of the new regime or the terrifying, icy demeanour of the new Duchess. With the house emptied of his sycophants, Henry was left alone with his wife and the jarring reality of his new life. He stormed into her private study later that afternoon, slamming the door behind him. "You have humiliated me," he snarled, crossing the room to stand over her desk. "You drove my friends away. You speak of my family's debts as if you were haggling in a fish market." Beatrice slowly looked up from a letter she was drafting to a slate supplier in Wales. The vulnerability that had once softened her features was entirely gone, replaced by a chilling composure. "I spoke the truth," she said evenly. "You married me for a transaction, Henry. I am simply ensuring the terms of the contract are met. You wanted £200,000 to fix this estate. I am fixing it. Did you truly believe I would just hand over my father's life's work for you to drink and gamble away while you mocked my pedigree behind closed doors?" Henry flinched, the memory of his own cruel words returning to haunt him. You were not meant to hear that." "But I did," Beatrice said softly, standing up. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she commanded the room entirely, and it was the greatest gift you could have given me. It cured me of a very foolish, very dangerous illusion. You do not love me. You will never love me. You love your title, and you love your comfort. Very well. Keep your title. But I control the comfort." Henry stared at her, genuinely seeing her for the first time. The starry-eyed, eager-to-please girl was dead. In her place stood a formidable woman who thought like a financier and fought like a street brawler. To his absolute horror, mixed beneath his blinding anger, he felt a sudden, unwelcome spark of profound respect. "You are a monster," he whispered, though the words lacked their usual venom. "No, Henry," Beatrice replied, turning back to her ledgers. "I am a Harrington, and you are going to learn what that means." 6 months passed. Winter thawed into spring, and the London season approached. Under Beatrice's iron grip, Blackwood Manor had begun to transform. The West Wing's roof was completely repaired with high-grade Welsh slate. The tenant farmers received their new equipment, increasing the spring yield projections by 20%. The estate was breathing again, fueled by Beatrice's ruthless efficiency and her refusal to approve a single unnecessary expense. Henry and Beatrice's marriage, however, remained a frozen wasteland. They existed in a state of polite, heavily armed neutrality. Henry spent his days riding the estate, surprisingly taking an interest in the agricultural improvements, once he realized Beatrice would only fund projects that promised a return on investment. They dined together in silence, spoke only of logistics, and slept in separate wings of the house. When May arrived, it was time for the Duke and Duchess of Wycliffe to return to Mayfair for the season. London society was eagerly anticipating the arrival of the merchant Duchess. Rumours of her strict financial control had trickled down from the country, painting her as a miserly, uncouth woman who was ruining the poor, noble Duke's life. The aristocrats sharpened their claws, ready to socially ostracize the upstart, who dared to put a leash on one of their own. But when Beatrice descended the grand staircase of the Wycliffe townhouse for the opening ball of the season, society was in for a shock. She did not wear the heavy, ostentatious Wycliffe sapphires. Instead, she wore a breathtaking, structural gown of midnight blue silk, adorned only with a simple, flawless diamond choker, a gift from her father, Thomas Harrington. She moved with a regal, untouchable grace, her posture impeccable, her eyes sharp and assessing. As Henry escorted her into the ballroom, he felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation tightening his chest. He watched as the lords and ladies who had planned to snub her were systematically disarmed by her sharp wit and chillingly polite demeanor. She did not stumble. She did not seek approval. She moved through the elite circles with the confidence of a woman who knew she could buy and sell every person in the room. It was during a waltz, while Henry watched from the sidelines, that the true threat emerged. "She is magnificent, is she not?" A deep, distinctly American voice drawled beside him. Henry turned to see Harrison Cole, a notoriously wealthy railway magnate from New York who had recently established a foothold in London. Cole was a self-made man, entirely unconcerned with titles or aristocratic protocol. He was handsome in a rugged, dangerous way, with sharp, dark eyes that were currently fixed intently on Beatrice. "She is my wife," Henry said, his tone dripping with territorial ice. Cole chuckled, sipping his champagne. "I am aware, Your Grace. I've done business with her father, Thomas, a brilliant man. It seems the apple did not fall far from the tree. I hear she has turned your crumbling estate into a profitable enterprise in less than a year. A rare mind in a woman. Usually, you English lords just use them as broodmares and bank accounts." Henry's jaw clenched so hard, his teeth ached. "Just a dowry," the words echoed mockingly in his head. "Beatrice's affairs are our family's business, Mr. Cole." "Of course," Cole smiled, though his eyes remained predatory. "But I must confess, I am looking for an investor for a new shipping line between Liverpool and New York. Thomas Harrington suggested I speak directly to the Duchess. He tells me she controls the capital now." Before Henry could process this shocking revelation that Beatrice was secretly managing her own investment portfolio outside of his knowledge, the music stopped. Beatrice gracefully departed her dance partner and walked toward the edge of the floor. Cole immediately stepped forward, intercepting her before Henry could. "Your Grace, Harrison Cole, your father sends his regards." Beatrice's icy demeanor thawed instantly into a bright, genuine smile. A smile Henry realized, with a sudden pang of jealousy, he had not seen directed at him since their honeymoon. "Mr. Cole, my father has written extensively of your aggressive expansion into the steel markets. It is a pleasure to finally meet you." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Cole said, taking her gloved hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles that lingered just a second too long. "I was hoping I might call upon you tomorrow to discuss a mutually beneficial venture. I would welcome it, Beatrice replied, her eyes flashing with genuine interest. I am always looking to diversify. Henry stepped forward, his heart pounding with an entirely new, terrifying emotion. He placed a possessive hand on Beatrice's lower back. She stiffened immediately at his touch, though she kept her smile fixed on the American. My wife has a very full social calendar, Mr. Cole, Henry said tightly. I am not certain she has time for business ventures during the season. Beatrice turned her head to look at Henry. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and utterly unforgiving. Nonsense, Henry, she said softly, her voice carrying just enough for Cole to hear. I always have time to manage my investments. After all, practical matters are the only things of true value, aren't they? She turned back to Cole. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Mr. Cole. I look forward to it. As she walked away, leaving Henry standing with the American rival, the Duke of Wycliffe realized with a sickening sense of dread that he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had wanted a dowry, and he had gotten one, but in the process, he had awakened a queen who was rapidly building her own empire, and she was building it entirely without him. The following afternoon, precisely at 2 o'clock, Harrison Cole arrived at the Wycliffe townhouse in Mayfair. He did not bring flowers or poetry. He brought a leather briefcase thick with maritime blueprints and financial projections. Beatrice received him in her private drawing room, bypassing the formal parlors entirely. She wore a day dress of austere charcoal wool that paradoxically made her look more commanding than any silk ball gown ever could. For 3 hours, the Duchess and the American magnate dismantled and reconstructed a plan to challenge the dominance of the Cunard line. Cole had the ships, but he needed British capital and, more importantly, the societal legitimacy that Beatrice's newfound, terrifying reputation could provide. She brought up cargo tonnage, coal tariffs, and the recent fluctuations of the Bank of England's interest rates with the ease of a seasoned parliamentarian. Cole leaned back in his velvet chair, nursing a glass of bourbon, his eyes gleaming with undisguised admiration. Your father, Thomas, warned me you were sharp, Beatrice. He failed to mention you were a guillotine. Beatrice allowed a small, genuine smile. My father is a sentimental man, Mr. Cole. I am merely protecting my assets. And what of your husband? Cole asked, gesturing vaguely toward the heavy oak doors that led to the rest of the house. I saw his face last night at the ball. The Duke of Wycliffe looked as though he wanted to challenge me to a duel at dawn. He is a man who suddenly realizes he has left his vault unlocked. Henry is adjusting to the realities of modern economics, Beatrice replied coolly, stacking the blueprints into a neat pile. He married a bank, Mr. Cole. He should not be surprised when the bank audits him. Outside the drawing room door, Henry stood paralyzed. He had intended to interrupt, to assert his authority as the master of the house, perhaps under the guise of offering them tea, but hearing Beatrice speak of him with such clinical, detached precision froze the blood in his veins. Over the next month, the London season became a psychological battlefield. Beatrice and Harrison Cole were seen everywhere together, riding in Hyde Park, occupying the Harrington box at the Royal Opera House, and deep in conversation at the corners of every major society ball. Society, which had prepared to mock the merchant duchess, instead found itself bowing to her. Wealth, when wielded with such unapologetic, terrifying confidence, possessed its own kind of nobility. Beatrice was not trying to fit into their world. She was buying it. Henry, conversely, felt his world crumbling. He was a duke, yet he felt entirely castrated by his own wife's brilliance. He realized, with a sickening jolt of clarity, that he was intensely, furiously jealous, not just of the time she spent with the rugged American, but of the smiles she gave him, the same bright, adoring smiles she had once reserved exclusively for Henry. He missed her. It was an agonizing, humiliating truth. He missed the girl who had brought him Byron's poetry. He missed the soft warmth of her eyes before he had extinguished it with his own arrogance. One evening in late June, after a particularly grueling dinner party where Beatrice had brilliantly outmaneuvered Lord Salisbury in a debate over railway tariffs, Henry finally snapped. He waited for her in her boudoir. When she entered, discarding her heavy diamond earrings onto the vanity, she did not startle. She merely met his gaze in the mirror, her expression unreadable. To what do I owe this intrusion, Henry? She asked, unpinning her hair. Henry crossed the room, his aristocratic composure entirely shattered. He looked desperate, his winter sea eyes dark with a storm of emotion. You are making a fool of me, Beatrice. Half of London thinks you are going to elope with that American railway baron. Harrison and I are establishing a transatlantic shipping syndicate, Henry, she stated calmly. It is a highly lucrative venture backed by J.P. Morgan himself. You should be pleased. It will significantly increase the Harrington capital. I do not care about the damned capital, Henry shouted, the words tearing from his throat. He caught her shoulders, turning her to face him. I care about my wife. I care that you look right through me. I care that you smile at him as if he hung the moon, while you look at me as if I am an insect on your shoe. Beatrice did not pull away, but she did not melt into his touch either. She looked up at him, her face a mask of sculpted ice. You told Richard and Simon that I was a provincial milkmaid. You said I was just a dowry. £200,000 to fix your roof. Do you deny it? Henry swallowed hard, the shame burning hot in his chest. I was a fool. I was a proud, stupid, arrogant fool trying to save face before my friends. But I see you now, Beatrice. I see the woman you are. Brilliant, formidable, beautiful. I beg of you, give me a chance to be a real husband to you. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips, hoping to reignite the spark he knew he had once possessed. Beatrice stepped back, smoothly breaking his hold. You cannot romance a ledger, Henry, she said softly, her voice echoing in the quiet room like a death knell. You set the terms of our marriage in the library at Blackwood Manor. It is a transaction. And as a businesswoman, I must tell you, I never renegotiate a closed contract. She turned her back on him, dismissing the Duke of Wycliffe as easily as a servant. Henry stood in the center of the room, entirely broken, realizing too late the absolute devastation of his own hubris. The end of the season approached, marked by the sweltering July heat and the mass exodus of the aristocracy back to their country estates. Before they departed for Blackwood Manor, Beatrice requested Henry's presence at the law offices of Sterling, and Hayes in Lincoln's Inn Fields. Henry arrived, feeling a profound sense of dread. For the past weeks, he had tried everything to win his wife back: flowers, humble apologies, attempts at genuine conversation. Every advance had shattered against the impregnable fortress of her polite indifference. When he entered the mahogany-paneled boardroom, he was surprised to see not only Beatrice and her head solicitor, Mr. Hayes, but also her father, Thomas Harrington, and to Henry's immense shock, Harrison Cole. What is the meaning of this? Henry demanded, his aristocratic pride flaring as he glared at the American. What is he doing at a private family meeting? Take a seat, Your Grace, Thomas Harrington said. The older man's voice was gravelly, carrying the undeniable weight of a man who had built an empire from soot and steel. He did not use the deferential tone Henry was accustomed to. He spoke to the Duke as if he were an unruly clerk. Henry rigidly took the chair opposite Beatrice. She sat flawlessly composed in a high-collared emerald green dress, her hands folded over a thick leather folio. Henry, Beatrice began, her voice crisp and professional. As you know, my dowry of £200,000 was placed into a joint trust upon our marriage, intended to clear the Wycliffe estate's debts and restore its profitability. Yes, Henry said, his jaw tight, and you have controlled every penny of it with an iron fist. I have, Beatrice agreed, but what you do not know is how I utilized those funds. When I audited the estate ledgers 6 months ago, I discovered that the debts you owed were not merely to tailors and gambling hells. Blackwood Manor itself, the unentailed surrounding lands, the tenant farms, and the mining rights to the north were heavily mortgaged to the London and Westminster Bank, as well as several private creditors. Henry's stomach dropped. He had kept the true, catastrophic extent of the mortgages hidden, hoping the dowry would slowly chip away at the interest before the banks foreclosed. I did not merely pay off your creditors, Henry, Beatrice continued, her eyes locking onto his. I bought the debts, all of them. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. You, what? Henry whispered, the color draining entirely from his face. Mr. Hayes, the solicitor, pushed a stack of heavy, wax-sealed documents across the table. Her Grace, utilizing the trust and backed by a secondary capital injection from Mr. Harrington and Mr. Cole's syndicate, systematically purchased every outstanding promissory note, mortgage, and lien against the Wycliffe unentailed properties. Furthermore, she purchased the remaining debts you held with the Rothschild banking family. Harrison Cole leaned forward, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. It was a brilliant corporate raid. Your Grace, the Duchess used the shipping syndicate as a front to move the capital without alarming your traditional London bankers. I was never courting your wife romantically. I am her business partner. We were acquiring you. Henry felt the room spin. He looked from the smirking American to the stoic Thomas Harrington, and finally, to his wife. You bought my debts, Henry breathed, the horrific reality crashing down upon him. I own them, Beatrice corrected him, her voice perfectly level. The entailment protects the title and the physical stones of the ancestral home, but I own the land the house sits on. I own the farms that feed it. I own the roads leading to it. Legally, Henry, the Duke of Wycliffe, is now entirely, irrevocably indebted to his Duchess. If I choose to call in these notes, you will be utterly bankrupt, a duke with a crumbling castle and not a single acre of land to his name. Henry was paralyzed. The sheer scale of her vengeance, the flawless, brutal execution of her plan, was staggering. She had not just taken control of his household, she had financially conquered him. He had married her thinking she was a naive peasant holding a purse. She had turned out to be a sovereign queen who had just annexed his entire kingdom. Why? Henry asked, his voice cracking, stripped of all its former arrogant glory. Why go to such lengths? You had already humiliated me. You had already proven your point. Beatrice stood up. She walked around the heavy oak table until she stood directly beside his chair. She looked down at him, the man who had shattered her heart in a dark library just months ago. Because I am just a dowry, Henry, she whispered, ensuring only he could hear the fatal echo of his own words. And a dowry is an investment. I simply ensured that I possess the controlling shares. She stepped back, turning to the solicitor. Mr. Hayes, present the Duke with the new terms of his allowance and the operational budget for the remainder of the year. Harrison, father, we have a train to catch. We are due in Liverpool to christen the new fleet. Beatrice, wait. Henry stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floorboards. He didn't care that her father was watching, or that the American rival was smirking. He was a man watching his entire life, and the only woman he now realized he truly, desperately loved walking out the door. What does this mean for us? For our marriage? Beatrice paused at the door. She looked back over her shoulder, the emerald silk of her dress catching the afternoon light. There was no hatred in her eyes, but there was no love either. It was the calm, terrifying look of a victor surveying a conquered, pacified territory. Our marriage remains exactly what you designed it to be, Your Grace, Beatrice said softly. A flawless, highly profitable transaction. I have saved your estate, and you have given me a title that opened the doors to the global market. We are even. She opened the door, stepping out into the bustling hallway of the law firm. But you will live at Blackwood, Henry pleaded, a desperate edge to his voice. We can start over. Please. I will return to Blackwood for Christmas and perhaps the summer to inspect the ledgers, Beatrice replied, her voice echoing with finality. But my work is in London now. Do enjoy the repaired roof, Henry. I paid a premium for the slate. And with that, the Duchess of Wycliffe walked away, leaving the Duke standing in the ruins of his own arrogance, a prisoner in a gilded cage to which his wife held the only key. The tragedy of the Duke of Wycliffe was not that he lost his fortune, but that he realized the true value of his wife only after he had irrevocably destroyed her love. In the late 19th century, a time when marriages of convenience between impoverished British aristocrats and wealthy industrial heiresses were common, few ended with such a spectacular reversal of power. Beatrice Harrington did not merely survive the cruel realities of a transactional marriage, she weaponized them. By stripping away her own romantic illusions, she ascended to become a formidable force in London's financial sector, redefining the boundaries of a woman's power in a man's world. Henry, left to rule over an empty, perfectly maintained estate, learned the most devastating lesson of all, that pride is a terrible substitute for love, and that the highest price a man can pay is underestimating the quiet, listening woman he assumes he has already bought.